Salutations, every pup. It's good to be back on the air. I know it's been a while since I've treated you to a podfic of style, and I'm sorry about that. Today we'll be reading chapter 36 of the one they call Broccoli by Texiliaz. As always, the link to the fic will be in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's jump on into it. Chapter 36, Meeting the Class. Chapter Summary. Broccoli finally meets Class 1A. It goes as well as one would expect. Author's notes. Hello, everyone! This is a bit of a shorter update, but I wanted to share this chapter, and I hope you all will enjoy it anyway. There's also a bit of art at the end that I made a while back. P.S. Thank you to ZXCBNM_0613 for beta reading this chapter. Izuku's point of view. Izuku stared down at the blanket in his hands, conflicted emotions running through him. What's wrong, kiddo? Nana asked him gently. I don't know, Broccoli answered honestly. I guess I just feel a bit bad for taking this away from Broccoli. It's still yours, kid, Hikage pointed out. Yeah, but it's not the same. Now it's here, while the rest of the collection is down there. It just feels incomplete. Why don't you just give it back, if it bothers you so much? Second huffed. I can't do that, Izuku gasped. That would be so rude! Before anyone could say anything else, there was a knock at the door, and Izuku suddenly remembered how he had promised to help Todoroki with his room earlier. He hurried to the door, only to find Ida standing there waiting for him. Ah, there you are! I was not sure if you were back yet or not. Shall we head over to Todoroki's room? Yes, let's go, Izuku agreed, shaking off all uncomfortable feelings from before, and instead trying to focus on the task at hand. Once they headed towards Todoroki's room, which was on the fifth and top floor. Once there, they got to see that Todoroki really was installing tatami mats. The room looked very different from their own rooms, and Izuku was honestly a bit impressed that the teen had managed to do this much all by himself. Todoroki showed them what to do, and then they worked in silence for a while. The air didn't feel comfortable, like it had with Shinso, though. No, it was like something was hanging over the group, and Izuku had a feeling he knew what it was. But if no one else brought it up, he wouldn't do it either. And for a while, it seemed like Todoroki and Ida had decided to not address the cat in the room, but then all that changed when the dual-haired teen opened his mouth to speak. So, you are Aizawa Sensei's son and cat? Shit! No, the son part was a lie? They don't exactly know that I'm living with them as their cat. They don't know? Ida exclaimed, sounding horrified. Nope, Izuku said, popping the word as he continued to install the mat. He felt weirdly calm about this. Maybe he'd finally explained the story so many times that he'd gotten used to it. But how can they not know? Why haven't you told them? Ida continued, having stopped working completely to instead chop his hands in the air. I didn't see any reason to. Things are good the way they are right now. They want and love their cat. Why risk ruining that by showing up as a human teenager, you know? I don't want them to hate me. That makes sense. Todoroki hummed, looking thoughtful. Excuse you? In what world does that make any sense? Aizawa-sensei and Yagi-san would never hurt or hate you, Midoriya. They are good people, not to mention how Aizawa-sensei is a pro-hero. Even pro-heroes do stuff behind closed doors, Todoroki muttered darkly. It's better to leave things be, rather than risk unlocking their violent side. Izuku nodded in agreement, even though he hardly doubted his dads would ever get violent with him. It was better to stay safe rather than risk being abandoned again. Ida looked sick to his stomach, though, and like he couldn't even fathom something like that happening. But still, I think you should tell them. They really are good people. I know they are, Izuku agreed softly. That's why I don't want to lose them. They left the conversation at that, though Todoroki and Ida did ask him more about his quirk. How do you plan to hide this from the class? I'll just go to bed early and lock the door. Broccoli is out most days anyway, so no one should suspect anything if he comes home during the evening. Speaking of time limit, it was nearing the time Zuko would have to change soon. He decided he didn't want to risk going overtime. He was still feeling sore and tired from pushing his limit earlier that day, and so he would skip dinner in the lounge and just eat at home instead. He said goodbye to Ida and Todoroki, who would tell the class that he'd gone to bed and to not disturb him, before slipping into his room and locking the door. There was still one thing he needed to get done before he went home, though, which was return to his hideout and pick up his shoes and school bag for tomorrow. He couldn't risk getting trapped like he had this morning and being unable to get his stuff before school starts. Leaving UA grounds was surprisingly easy in his cat form. Broccoli simply leaped from his balcony to a nearby tree before walking out the front gate. He saw a camera following him and just knew Nezu was watching. Once he'd reached the park, he turned back into a human and gathered his things, only to then realize a problem. How in the world was he supposed to sneak this back to UA without anyone seeing him? He couldn't carry it in his cat form, but he couldn't just leave UA as a cat and come back as a human. "Hey, I've got an idea. It's stupid enough to actually work," Daigoro said with a grin and a snap of his fingers. And so, despite knowing better, Izuka listened to Daigoro's foolproof plan. And you know what? The man was right. It was so stupid, it might actually work. The plan was for Izuka to carry his stuff as close to the UA wall as he could. Then he turned back into Broccoli with as much stuff as possible. And to his surprise, his shoes actually disappeared this time. But he still wasn't able to make his whole bag disappear. Then, Daigoro and Nana helped him activate and control their quirks, making Broccoli float above the wall and use Black Whip as a rope to bring the bag up with him. Then he simply floated down at the other side, found his balcony, and floated up there to drop his things off. "I can't believe that actually worked," Izuku wheezed as he turned back into a human and took off his shoes. That had hurt, and he wondered once again where his stuff went when he transformed. It felt like he'd swallowed a pair of shoes. "Told ya it would," Daigoro said proudly. With that out of the way, Izuku once again turned into his cat form, and Broccoli floated down from his balcony. He rounded the building, trying to see if any windows to his dad's apartment were open, but no such luck. Which meant he had to walk in through the front door, where all his classmates were. Yay! Figuring maybe he could sneak past them, Broccoli carefully stepped through the cat door and pressed himself as close to the wall as he could while keeping watch on the loud teenagers that were gathering in the lounge. What Broccoli failed to notice, however, was the group of students sitting in the smaller lounge, which was right next to where Broccoli was sneaking around. "Geez, do they all have to be so loud?" Broccoli muttered to himself. "I'm glad I decided to skip dinner. I don't think I could stand how loud all my classmates are." "Midoriya?" a small voice whispered, barely loud enough for Broccoli to hear. Broccoli froze and turned to face Koda, who was sitting in the smaller lounge with a bunny and a book in his lap, both staring wide-eyed at him. Did you hear all that?" Koda nodded numbly. For a moment, both just stared at each other, before Broccoli sneaked out a quick, "Please don't tell anyone," before bolting towards his dad's apartment. "Wait!" Koda called out, gaining the attention of the others. And if that wasn't bad enough, all the commotion had caused his classmates to notice him. And Hagakure, who Broccoli had failed to notice before, had excitedly picked him up with a squeal. "Hagakure! You shouldn't just pick someone up like that!" Ida scolded, sounding stressed and horrified as he rushed to Broccoli's rescue. Without thinking, Broccoli swiped at the invisible hands and got her to let him go, before landing on all fours with his fur all fluffed up due to stress. More students had started to gather, some of which tried to pet him or cooed at him to come over for pets. Broccoli hissed at all of them and even swiped at Ashida's hand when she got too close for comfort. Then he saw it. A safe space. And without thinking, Broccoli blindly rushed over to Todoroki, who had been seated in the common lounge. Sure, it was in the wrong direction from his dad's apartment, but anything was better than staying trapped by all these teenagers. Todoroki jumped in a seat when Broccoli suddenly crashed into his left side, burrowing himself as far into the couch as his friend as he could. "Hey, no fair! How come he ran to you and not one of us?" Maybe because you were all being loud and scared him, you idiots, Bakugo scoffed. Broccoli felt a hand at his back, and he flinched even further into the couch with a whimper. It made the hand pause before settling like a blanket across his back. He slowly stopped shaking and could somewhat recognize the sound of Todoroki whispering reassurances to him as he kept a warm hand over him to shield him from his classmates. He was so small like this that the majority of his friend's hand completely draped over him. "What's all the commotion about?" came a tired voice that Broccoli distinctly recognized as his dad. His ears perked up and he peeked up around Todoroki to see Shota walk into the lounge, looking exhausted and done with everything. "Aizawa-sensei, we kind of found your cat." "More like chased him around like a bunch of morons," Bakugo muttered, only to get elbowed by Kirishima. As soon as they mentioned Broccoli, Shota's gaze landed on him, and he softened remarkably. "There you are," Shota sighed, lifting Broccoli up from his hiding place so he could instead cling to the front of his dad's uniform. His gaze then turned razor-sharp as he glared at the students, who all shrank back at the stare. "What did you all do?" Shota demanded, sounding downright furious. "We didn't do anything," Kaminari defended, looking ghostly pale. "Some of our classmates got excited about seeing your, cat, and just wanted to say hi. Hagakure picked him up, and then he rushed to hide by Todoroki," Ida explained, hands chopping in the air. At that, Shota turned his death glare towards Hagakure, who sheepishly hid behind Ojiro. "I thought I made it clear not to touch him," he scolded harshly. "I'm sorry, he was just so cute," Hagakure apologized meekly, while earning a few quiet agreements in return. Sensei?" A meek voice suddenly cut through all other noise. Shota and Broccoli both turned to look at Koda, who was standing a few meters away, holding his own pet bunny to his chest for comfort. "What is it, Koda?" Shota asked, voice probably harsher than he had intended. For a moment, Broccoli panicked, and he frantically shook his head at his classmate. Please don't tell Dad. Sensei, please don't tell anyone about me." Broccoli begged him, his voice coming out in tiny meows that were only understood by the quiet boy in front of them. "I just, Koda hesitated, and Shota narrowed his eyes. What's his name?" The boy finally settled on asking, making Broccoli let out a deep sigh of relief. It was clear that Shota figured the teen had wanted to ask something else, but ultimately decided not to question him. "His name is Broccoli," Shota answered softly, before giving Broccoli a small smile. "Broccoli, meet my hellspawn of the class 1A. At that statement, Bakugo, who had been dumbly staring at Izuku this whole time, suddenly bursts out laughing. He was laughing so hard that he's clutching his stomach and looked like he was about to fall down to the ground. When Bakugo could finally breathe again, he managed to wheeze out, You named him Broccoli?" A few others snickered at the name too, and Shota glared at them. Is there something wrong with that name? Most students clammed up at that and just shake their heads. Bakugo is still snickering, but with a grin he turned to Broccoli and said, Nah, it suits him. Shota sighed. Broccoli has an intelligence quirk, though it's not on the same level as Principal Nezu. I still want all of you to respect him and be mindful of what you say around him, because I can assure you, even if he can't speak, he understands what you are saying. Also, don't try to pet him carelessly. He has a bad experience of brats attacking him in the past, so he doesn't trust people and doesn't like people touching him. I expect you all to respect that, Shota said, sounding angry once again. Wait, someone attacked him? Itadaka asked, watching the tiny cat with so much pity that Broccoli couldn't help but shrink into himself. Yes, 3 years ago when he was just a kitten. Shota sighed. Stupid brat. You mean he's not a kitten now? There were a few shocked gasps as they all started murmuring about how tiny he is. Broccoli couldn't take all this attention anymore, and he reached up with one of his paws to tug at his dad's capture weapon. The man looked down at him, and Izuku gave him a very tired look before letting his head fall against the man's chest. Shota sighed again and gave him a scratch behind the ears before turning back to the students. Look, you don't need any details. I don't think he wants us talking about this. Just respect him, and it should be fine. And if I ever see any of you hurt him, I will expel you on the spot. Are we clear? Broccoli saw Kachan pale a bit at that, and their eyes met for a small second before he turned away. He really hoped Shota never remembered or learned that Kachan was one of those brats present that day. As expected, Broccoli had gotten an earful from both Shota and Toshinori for running away. Not that he had much choice. The evening was spent in their little apartment, which was thankfully soundproofed, and meant he could be there without the loud ruckus from his classmates. Nighttime was when things got a bit more difficult, though, because Broccoli just could not fall asleep. He'd tried sleeping in his dad's room, with Slushy by his side, but he just felt restless and couldn't feel comfortable in this new place. After hours of twisting and turning, he finally gave up and went to his cat house, only for the same thing to happen there. Eventually, he gave up and went to his own, Izuku's, room, but no luck there either. After some consideration, he finally dragged the blanket he got earlier that day back to his dad's apartment before stuffing it inside of his little cat house. He kneaded at it until it was a comfortable bowl shape, and he laid down and tried to fall asleep. Only for it to not work this time, either! With a sigh, Broccoli climbed out, turned back into Izuku, and pulled out his phone. He then turned back into Broccoli and crawled inside the cat house, phone with him and all. Then, after making sure the curtain was completely shut and kept him out of anyone's view, he used his nose to navigate YouTube and pulled up some random videos to watch until he eventually, thankfully, managed to fall asleep. And then there's a black and white photo of Broccoli cuddled up with his blanket watching his phone. Author's notes. Welp, that could have gone worse, and better. Sorry this was so short. I promise we'll have more Broccoli and 1A interactions in the future. Next up, we'll have the midterm exams, as well as Broccoli's own exams as a support animal. Expect shenanigans to happen, lol. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this chapter, and thank you everyone for your continued patience, comments, and support. Hope you all have a wonderful day or night wherever you are in the world. And that was chapter 36. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Please go show the original author, Texiliaz, some love, and please leave me a comment. I love reading your comments. They make me so happy. Please leave me specifically hate comments. That being said, I have a few people I need to shout out. So, shout outs to Horizon on Shota Dad Salva, AD Ecode, Prince Darling 9868, and Starkill Knight 6167. Thank you so much for your hate comments. Now, people, please do not flame these people in the comments. I ask for hate comments. That being said, leave a hate comment and I'll shout you out in the next video. I really like this chapter. I think it was so fun, even if it was short. I like Ida stressing so much about Izuku. He's like, oh my god, this is my classmate. My classmate, and they're treating him like a cat, but he's a human and he's a cat. What am I doing? I love Ida being like that. It's so funny to me. And I hope you guys all enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, pups.